Very good evening to everybody. It's Monday evening conversations from lockdown with myself, Aidan. It's brought to you by Kyalami Park Equestrian in association with Mumpro SA I4 Williams Trailers. Do hope that you are enjoying the series. If you are, please feel free to comment or share. So this evening, we get to know somebody who, from the look of her social media accounts, has lived a very special life, has lived all over the world, and I'm looking forward to getting to know her just a little bit better. And of course, she's a top rider as well. One of the top echelon riders, was the joint winner of the 2018 World Cup Series on her fantastic Camaro. And of course, we are talking to Marlene Sinclair. Very good evening. How are you?
I'm doing very well. How are you doing? I'm
fine, thank you. A little bit cold. Winter is upon us. The first wintry day.
That's for sure. And thank you so much for having me. It's been so great. I love watching the series.
Thank you. Marlene, as I said in my intro, you seem to have lived a very, how do I put it, exotic life. I see pictures of you and your mom in India and all over the globe. So I'm really looking forward to hearing all these stories. So in your own words, you tell me, where were you born? You obviously have the American roots, but you tell me, and I'm just looking forward to listening. So I'll jump in when necessary, but you take it away. Tell us, where were you born, the whole story. No, please.
Well, I was born in New York. New York. Actually, I was born in the Bronx, so I'm a true, proper New Yorker. I
in the
grew up in New Rochelle. Actually, was my first home, and that's just on the border of North Bronx. So it's Manhattan, Bronx, and then New Rochelle. There, my family wasn't at all into horses. We lived a very city life. My father, at the time when I was very young, he was a Wall Street guy. So we were always Manhattan and always never far from there. And then at one point, they had bought a farm in upstate New York in the Catskills. Mm-hmm. And I was very young, maybe 6, 7 years old, something like that. And so on the weekends, we would drive out to the farm. And it was a huge property, a big barn and a house. And we ended up with some cows and pigs and chickens. And I mean, my father was real New York kind of guy. My mom was a perfect 1950s housewife. That's how we started. We had some horses. We had some quarter horses. And I remember I had a buckskin pony. I don't think it was mine. It was just sort of on the property. My father used to dress up in his cowboy hat and chaps and get on his quarter horse and go galloping out. I don't think he'd ever ridden at that point. And I used to go bareback the way, I don't know if you grew up this way. I don't think kids are allowed to do this anymore, but I would just jump on my pony bareback with a pair of shorts and a t-shirt with his halter and tie the lead rein and go galloping out. We had a stream that had like a dam with, we had a rope on a tree, and without fail, every time I got out there, I would stand on his back and go on the rope, go in the middle, turn around, and he would be pissing off back home. And so I'd walk back, and that was our life. And then somehow we started breeding New York thoroughbreds for the racetrack. Wow. Not a lot. It wasn't a big stable. My mom, very demure lady, very refined and conservative. She ran it. She wasn't much at the stables, but she's passed since. So it's hard, because as an adult and as I'm out here and getting back into horses, I really would have loved to know the full story, because it just made sense to me back then, but now it doesn't make any sense how she was into it. Anyway, so we would be the sales in Saratoga Springs, the yearling sales. I used to work the sales when I was about 12, 13 years old. And I started riding a bit, but, you know, a little bit Western, a little bit, you know. And then at one point, we had, a friend of mine and I, at a birthday party, went to see the Lipizzaners that come to New York. And it just thrilled me to my core. And for me, there was nothing else but horses. So I asked my parents if I could have some lessons, you know, at a proper riding school. So I went to Boulderbrook and a few other places, quite well-known stables in outside of New York City. And then somehow ended up with riding at a place, the farm was called Coker Farm, was owned and run by Judy Richter. Judy, she might not be as well known to you guys over here. She's won, in fact, just recently, she won, I actually wrote it down because I couldn't, it was a lifetime achievement and contribution to the sport in the US Equestrian Annual Meeting. Her sister, Carol Hoffman Thompson, might be more well known to you guys, definitely to Gonda and Annalie. And they were, Judy and Carol, they were all in the group of Bill Steinkraus, Gordon Wright, George Morris, Victor Hugo Vidal, Frank Chapeau. That was sort of the Bert Denemeth. That was the group, that little group of
well, that's quite a group to be involved in. I mean, that is like the core members of,
Yeah, no, it was definitely, and Carol Thompson, she, in the 60s, I mean, she's jumped in the Olympics, I think 68. She is won everywhere, Hickstead, she was, but it was, you know, a little bit more in the 70s and 60s and 70s, and then she went in other directions. And Judy actually taught William Steinkraus's sons. Sure. So it was not Bill that taught them. It was, well, he taught, you know, but it was actually Judy. Judy's taught a lot of riders in my age group that have gone on to do incredible things in our sport. She was a phenomenal teacher. So that really was my basis, was Judy. And of course I had lessons also.
And she was kind of at the height of her powers.
At the height, she was, yeah. She was, you know, she was more of a hunter rider. She was a top hunter rider. Won, you know, the National Hunter Rider of the Year many years in a row for the American. I think it used to be called the American Horse Show Association back then. But my father, when he took me there, his agreement with Judy is that I could have lessons, but I had to work. So he would pay for the lesson, but I needed to work the day. So we lived a bit far away, so I would go on the weekends, and I would work from the morning feeding all the way up to the evening, and then my lift would come to go back to New York. And that was just a part of the deal. How I ended up, so Coker Farm was a huge place in Bedford, New York. And Norman Della Gioia, who I think you know, he rented a small stable on the side. Somehow, I don't know if he lost a coin toss or something, but I ended up riding for him. And you know, back in those days, it was a little bit different in the States than it is now. It wasn't, you know, 110, 120, 130, and you work your way up. It was green, you know, hunters, green jumpers. There was junior amateur jumpers, and then there was open jumpers, and that was the big stuff. And then the junior amateur, we were from anywhere from 1.30 to 1.45. But you know, talking with those other great riders from South Africa that, you know, I've idol worshipped for years, and of course Gonda and Annalie, who I know very well. They would tell you that back in the day, it wasn't really the height. They were just huge. No matter whatever you jumped, it was just big, heavy poles. You could run, and I mean, I used to be a fast rider, believe it or not. Not these days, but back then. Anyway, so I started riding for Norman, and Judy's always been one of my great mentors, even till today. She's still around, and she's, you know, I would attribute my beginning, my equitation, my beginning stages as a horsewoman, not just a rider, from Judy. She really was the quintessential horsewoman. And I mean, I've trained with Hugo Vidal, I've trained with Gordon Wright, and of course George, and I've had lessons, you know, and worked with all of them back when I was very young. And I think that's that base, just the knowledge and the love of the horse, and that the old-fashioned, not old-fashioned actually, that to me the sport is really about discipline and about respect, and it's purely that passion, that love for that horse, you know. And and that's what I learned from all these great riders. And then I went to Norman, where I was just, all I did was ride. I was
so Norman, you say rented boxes on the same yard as Judy, so he was on the same property.
He was
so
on the same.
He would have watched you growing up and training with her and developing as a young rider?
Yes, absolutely. And I'm sure that I must have also helped out. Oh, I know I helped out because I was there every weekend, every holiday, every day off, snow days. I'd find a way, I'd go there, you know, instead of school, I'd go. And all I did was work. I cleaned stables, I fed, I groomed, I cleaned tack, I gave leg ups, I polished boots, I did everything I had to do. So I think, and Norman, just, you know, for people who might not know, he was a bronze medal in Barcelona, which was actually, I was already in India at that point. But he was also on the Olympic team in 1980, which never went because America boycotted. It was in Moscow. So, but in between them, world champs, he won the World Cup in Vienna. He's one of the greats of American show jumping. Anyway, the one thing that he taught me was he's always been a man of few words. There was not a lot of blah blah blah, you know. It was, you come, you do your work, you do it correctly, you be there, and if you know, you make mistakes, but you own up, you correct it, you go. No emotion, you work.
Black and white.
Hard. Yeah. So I rode, and at that point, because in those days, it was great to be a junior. I was very lucky because I was able to catch ride a lot. There was a whole group of us catch riders all over, especially up and down the East Coast on the circuit.
What does that term mean?
That means we would just be at the show. We'd have saddles sort of at all the arenas, and we would just get on horses and ride them. We might know a day before, but it's usually on the day. If one of the riders, the amateurs, were having difficulty, or even if one of the big riders was having difficulty with a horse that would stop at water or I don't know, at a wall, or maybe get into the corner and rear, and they couldn't get after them because they were big classes, we would take them and get them around and then give them back to the big riders, which, you know, I mean, my group of sort of my colleagues, as it were, I would say, are people like Alice Debaney, who I'm not sure many people might know on this side, but she's one of the top US riders, you know, that I've ever known. She's been on the Global Champions Tour. She's even ridden. She rode and won at Spruce Meadows years ago on the Natural, Catherine Birdsall's horse. Okay. I think that was his last show, was with Alice. So she rode him. She'd never ridden him before and jumped him in a big class. But she was, and we always fought for first and second. We were always, but I mean, we had the likes of Peter Wilde and Aaron Vale, and of course, Meredith, Laura Kraut, we were all in the same age group. BZ also, but BZ was a few years older, and Patton at the time, that was her surname, BZ Patton, and even Greg Best, a few years older, but still because at one point you had to be an amateur to jump compete in the Olympics, which I don't know if it's still the same. I don't really think so, because all the professionals make their living at it. So back in the day, I'd even have a good runoff against BZ and Greg and all of that generation of top riders. And Yeah, it was, my father had bought me 2 horses that I recall when I was young. The things that I recall him buying me were, there was an equitation horse, a hunter, a horse named Victor, which it would have, not really my claim to fame. It was Joni Scharfenberger, but I'll tell you about him just now. And a camper, which you guys call a caravan, which I lived in. I graduated high school. So I was riding with Norman when I was, I think I was 15 when I was riding, I would say professionally for Norman.
Yeah.
And we at one point went over to, we were in France, he was jumping in Laval and Dinard, and there was a circuit. And we went to Holland and we tried this little horse. I mean, I was a big girl. I'm a tall girl, but I was young and chubby, and and he was a 5-year-old. Anyway, tried him. He was super, but Norman says we're buying him, and it was cheap. If I recall correctly, it was $30,000 US, which would have been in 83, I think. Which may have been a little bit of money then, but not really. I mean, that was really small. So this horse was brother to Calypso, Melanie Smith's Calypso, the Olympic horse. Yeah. But he was very small. So I think he was, I don't know, Bernie Traurigg since then has said that he owned him. I'm going to have a chat with Bernie. He'll let me know if he ever catches this, because then I might get disciplined. But anyway, Victor was in Eindhoven. We went to try him there. And I was like, Norman's like, I don't care, you're buying him. So, okay, fine. So brought him back, and just quickly, I won everything with him. I even won, we have one show of the year, our biggest show of the year was our Derby, which was in Rhode Island. I mean, that you have to see. One day, if I see any videos of Beezy or Katie or Leslie Burr, and I mean, the way they'd run around, we had, I think there were 4 banks. There was 2, we call them a grub, but it's our like Devil Dyke, but with huge ditches in the middle, and 2 walls and 3 hedges. And I mean, it was, but they would run. Anyway, Victor, I won the junior amateur Derby that year. And that year we had, I mean, everybody, there was the lineup. I also have a list someplace. It was, I mean, again, a lot of riders, I'm sure you would know, maybe the younger people wouldn't know, but in that year, Andy Warhol actually was giving the trophy. And that night there was a very famous party called the Roundup, infamous party. And I was 15, and I was, no, sorry, that's a lie. I was 16 because I drove my caravan there. So, because I was living in Camper City. And that was my night. I hung out with Andy Warhol and his whole crew. And they say, that I've never seen it, but there's a rumor that he took some photographs, which he always did. And he painted a painting of Victor night jumping, which would be wonderful to find one day. But that, whether it's rumor or truth, I don't know. But wouldn't that be?
You have to find out. It's probably worth a fortune as well.
I know, but it certainly is not mine, and I could really use it about now. But anyway,
claim royalty. Say, that's me. That's me.
Yeah.
Wow.
But so, Victor, then I won.
You were 15 at this time, so
no, I was actually just 16 because I drove there. So I drove my truck and my trailer. So I would have, because 16
so
in America.
did you finish school and all that, or were you juggling school while you were doing this?
Yeah, no. Listen, I'm a big believer in school, and I'm an overeducated underachiever, definitely. But I finished high school. I was 15. I went to an all-girls private boarding school outside of New York. You know, quite a tough, proper school. And but because of my riding, I was able to sort of skid through quite quickly. And so I finished when I was 15, and my birthday's in January. So I actually finished in December, and then we end the year in June. So I graduated in June, but I was already 16, but I had finished school. So I was actually living with Norman and Jeannie, his wife, and then I was living, before I got the camper, I was living mainly with the grooms, Norman's grooms, who were really my teachers. You know, they were like big brothers and sisters for me. And, you know, they were Irish, English, Swedish, French. You know, we had from all over the world, a few Mexican guys, and they really are. And these guys are the ones taking care of some of our top horses, like I Love You and Michael Matt's Jet Run. And I mean, all those grooms, even to today, are still, I think they're some of the greatest horsemen and horsewomen to ever walk the earth. They taught me everything.
So you had really a proper solid grounding in horsemanship, because you were working as well as doing the riding. I mean, you pitched in, you really,
everything.
I'm just imagining what a great upbringing to a world of horses.
No, it doesn't get better. And as I look back, when I ended up disappearing into East Africa and India, and what, you know, when I had a complete blackout for almost 20 years. And then when I came out and I realized who I was with, I mean, I knew back then that I was with the best of the best, but they were, I mean, I rode for Rodney Jenkins, Michael Matz let me ride, you know, a few horses now and again. I rode for Katie, Leslie Burr. I tried.
Did you ride Chef?
No, never. Can you imagine? The only big horse. Actually, no, I was on Jet Run and walked him out after a class. That was a very, I mean, I was a little kid. I must have been 15, 16 at the time, I suppose. But I used to, like for Derby, for instance, I used to get I Love You fit. So he was a tough little stallion. He was a Selle Francais, the one that Norman won a lot on. I mean, the World Cup finals he won. He was, you know, and he won. He was Horse of the Year, I think 2 or 3 years in a row in America on I Love You at the time. And the other thing, just quickly for Victor also, well, actually he was part, but I was the leading junior rider on the Florida circuit for my last 2 years of my last 2 junior years. And that was, I mean, I rode a lot of horses, had always lots of rides, and you know, you just, back in the day, you just gallop. And it wasn't because I was a kid, because even if you look now, when I first started jumping at the bigger stuff here, I flap my elbows, you know, I have this little kind of wait, and then go. But if you look at videos back in the 80s, that's how we rode. Yeah. So I missed a whole part of the finesse and just, I mean, I've come back into a completely different sport. It's so different. Time was never an issue. Mind you, I still would never have gotten time back there like I do now, but it was never an issue. You know, you always went into your corners and into your turns and you know, in the first rounds. And now, you know, it's and I mean, obviously the jumps were big and heavy, even in stadiums, and you know, it was just different. And striding was, you know, we as Americans walk everything pretty much from the timer to the timer, but I don't remember the questions, or you know, it wasn't like that. So it's a different sport. But
and those 2 years in your juniors when you were dominating, who were your contemporaries? You said like Meredith is your age group. Were they all on the circuit?
Yeah, but not she's from California. Okay. And Laura Kraut's from the South, you know, so I mean, I could, you know, kick. I'm sure that Laura would say, I don't know about Meredith. Meredith was a little bit tough because we had a few from California, Jenny Iverson, Meredith, God, it was a long time ago. There's a few other names, but they were quite fast, but we didn't have to, the only time we really saw them was for the indoors when they came we had Harrisburg, we had the Pennsylvania National Horse Show, Washington, Baltimore, and New York City, Madison Square Garden, and they would come for those shows. So we didn't see them much. Laura, I think she would have told you that she'd couldn't catch me much. I mean, now I can not breathe the same air as she does. But, you know, it was a different, Peter Wilde was one of my really good mates. I'm just trying to think of other riders. McLean Ward was a baby. I mean, he was like, you know, about 13, I think, or no, when I finished my junior years, when I was 18, he was probably about 13. But he was already starting to jump. He was a freak from when he was, you know, a young kid. Jimmy Toronto was one of my contemporaries. We had people like Donald Cheska, the Leon brothers, Peter and Mark and Armand. And they were all little, they're all BZ and Greg's, but they were all, you know, in our party group, kind of, you know, and our mates. And you know, as professional riders, we were, I mean, it was an unbelievable.
And was Norman De La Joya the one who was training you right throughout? Because you mentioned a few names that you had lessons with some other people as well. Did that come later, or was that in this?
No, that was I would say almost. Okay, George was, I was with Norman, George Morris, but the other was around Judy time. I was very young, and Norman. With Norman, okay, so at Wembley Farm, which was what his stable was called, he also had a rider named Jeffrey Wells. And Jeffrey Wells might ring a bell to you. He's jumped, not sure if he's jumped Olympics, to be honest with you. I missed quite a few when, like I said, when I was in the bush, but he's jumped World Cup finals, and also in those middle 80s were his big years. I think it was 84, 86. He's won every Grand Prix in America. He's, except for the Invitational, but I think he was definitely on the podium a few times. Anyway, so Jeffrey was Norman's professional open rider, and I was Norman's professional junior. And so we were always on the road together. And I would say we were on the road, if I say 40 weeks a year or more, we were just always on the road. We would leave a show on Sunday, drive to a new place, set up camp, the tents would be up and everything. We'd park our caravans and we'd be at the next show, and it would start on Tuesday. And Jeffrey, when I had to do equitation. We all had to do it as a kid. I was not a great equitation rider. I was usually in the top 20 in Madison Square Garden every year, but like by the skin of my teeth. I had this elbow that I just, plus I used to catch ride, and I never had a top equitation horse, so I would sort of get everybody's leftovers by then, and I mean, they were good horses, but not the quality of you know, for Maclay.
And they're coming to you when there's generally a problem that you need to sort out, and maybe
that was ride
a little bit harder and give a little bit of a flap, and I suppose these develop little habits over the years. It seems like you were perfectly poised and set up to make a proper, that this was going to be your life, that you were going to be a professional equestrian and continue to mix it up with all these big names. So what happened next?
Well, I'll tell you. So with Victor, we were at a show called Farmington. It was in Connecticut. It was another very big show, huge Grand Prix. Always lots of press and camera and movie stars, and it was a good show. I had won the first class on Victor, and Norman, the next day, Norman said, go back to the barn. I said, why? He said, just go back. Joni's going to get on Victor. I said, what are you talking about? She said, she's going to try Victor. I said, but, you know, I can't remember. I just went back to the stable, and I watched Joni Scharfenberger, wonderful, one of a very dear friend still to this day. She rode with George Morris, and she was already on many Nations Cup teams at that time. I can't remember the name of her big horse at the time, but she sat on Victor. I watched them jump, and as far as I can remember, they didn't vet him. She wrote a check for him, which I didn't even know, and it was one of close to I think a record amount of money at the time, huge amount of money, and they drove away.
But hang on a sec, he was your horse, your dad.
Yeah, he was my horse. But you know, Norman what can I say? Norman, I think Norman knew. I was really a kid. I was 17, and I was like I say, I was a cat. I was just a professional. I was just a rider. All I did was ride. I never trained at home. I was always in the ring. I trained in the ring or in the evening. Every evening, Norman used to put me on a lunge line, and I think it was every evening at a show when there was a horse that needed to be lunged. He would take the horse out, put me on no irons, and I would get lunged. In fact, even when I went back to ride for Norman, when I first started jumping here, because I just really wanted his input and some of his help. So I went to Florida to work for him for a few months. And George was there once a week to come and teach Nick, his son, and a few other young, Hillary Simpson, and a few other young riders. And George remembers me fondly. He couldn't believe that I wasn't as chubby as I used to be, but that was something else. But he even said, I remember you, with that accent of his. And he said, and Norman, every day, every evening, we were leaving and you'd be on that lunge. I said, that was me. I said, you see, Norman, George Moore says you were cruel. That's something. Because George was not a soft cupcake back then, But that was the way we trained, and that's what I did. And I think it was, he knew. For me, I assumed the Victor was going to be my big horse. But this amount of money was something, my father was not in this for the money, but he, like I said, he bought those 2 horses at a low amount. And I think that Norman realized that amount of money like this, it was $1 million. And you can't walk away from that. And I'm sure he had probably made a call to my father. I don't know. But so the point being is that actually
$1 million in the early to mid 80s. Is that what you're saying?
It was 80. It would have been 86, I think. Don't mark me on that but
wow.
But that was in the beginning of the year, and it was, I think, about 3 or 4 months later. They were on a Nations Cup team in Spruce Meadows, Victor, with George and I want to say Ann Krasinski, and I don't know, but there were so many top riders at that time. I mean, they were like a dime a dozen, just the greats. And Victor and Joni had 3 clear rounds. And then they won. And then they were over, did the summer season in Europe. And I remember George telling me, he even wrote me, I have a beautiful letter for George that he wrote to me recently, within the last few years, and said he went around like a hunter. And the Europeans couldn't believe that he could just hunt around, such a little horse, hunt around Aachen, I don't know, it was there was a series of Nations Cups. And he said not one pole the entire summer, Victor. Joni was a super rider. She's older than I, not much.
Marlene,
but he was ready. He was ready to go.
That must have devastated you, having to sell that horse, and especially that you didn't really know about it. You were called to the back of the barn, bring your horse, see some other girl, get on, write a check, and you were pretty much in the dark. So I can only imagine you must have been, despite the money, you must have been devastated.
No, it was, I think it was the beginning of the end for me at that point in my career. I regret very much not having continued all those years, because actually after my junior years, I so when I was 18, that was my last junior year. And then Norman didn't know what to do with me after that, because he had Jeffrey already World Cup rider, big time. And I was just out of juniors, and I can jump the big stuff, which I had jumped plenty of opens at that point on different horses. But it was tough, because also he was still fighting for rides as well at the time, Norm. Not fighting for rides, but yeah, he was top rider. He still had Barcelona in front of him. And so he sent me to, one of his best friends was Nelson Pessoa. And he sent me over to Belgium. So I was there for almost not quite a year, about 8 months, I think. And I rode for Neko. And that was, that was just a whole other world for me. I still remember him saying, sit in the saddle, sit in the saddle, sit in the saddle, because I was really an American rider and really hunting, but he had me sit and he had me really ride. I jumped in some great shows, not in big classes, never jumped in a big class until here. And I mean, not in it's smaller Grand Prix, like 145s and stuff.
Where was Pessoa based in Belgium? Was it just outside of Waterloo?
Yes, exactly.
With the big, I was there for a couple
indoor
of months.
That had the big window where we would eat and watch to the indoor.
Yeah,
it was a huge, and he had that cook that was from North Africa that used to make couscous every night of our lives.
I don't remember the cook, but if it's the same yard, it was the courtyard. The massive with the cobblestones, and then up the top they had their indoor and I was there for a while.
I was very lucky.
You must be roughly the same age as Rodrigo.
No, Rodrigo also was. So when I was there, I actually rode one of Rodrigo's horses because it was too much horse for him. He was the same age, I think, as McLean, I assume. So he was a kid. Have been about 14 maybe when I was there, and in fact I rode one of his horses at Mechelen. That was a phenomenal show. But it's with Neko. It was I didn't feel so out of my. No, I think I felt a bit out of my depth because it was. I realized at that point who I was with. I mean, I was with Jos Lansink was there at the time, and Evelyn Blaton and Ulrika Bittegard, who rode for, who's also still to this day one of my very dear friends, rode for Sweden. And it was, I really learned how to ride. That was hard work.
Was Jos Coombs there at that stage, who did a lot of training with? Okay.
People came in and out. Okay, so Ulrika and I lived in a little cottage in a cow field, and we would have people. The Italian team would come, the French team would come, the Dutch team, it was, if I was only now, if I could just go back, that if I could just be me now and go back there.
But I'm interested, after you sold this horse, was money not reinvested into finding another one for you?
Well, what I did, I drove home from that show with the check and I gave it to my father. And I said, I just wanted to thank you for everything you've done. See, I thought I was a real smart ass, now I'm big girl and I don't need any more help. And that was it. No more help from that point forward. Yeah, you would have thought, I've made some mistakes when it comes to even here, not having invested in younger horses in maybe a property or something, but anyway, we'll come to that. But no, I think after, when I came back then from Neko, I still loved so much. Norman found me a very good job for someone who I prefer not to say, because what I'm going to say next, I don't want to come on to her. But all she did, she's a big rider in America, but she used to have a big syndicate for all of her horses. So they were on lots of big money. And I used to have to ride those horses. Back in those days, they'd put tacks on rails, they'd put, bamboo, we'd hit, all that. And all I did was eat Dunkin' Donuts. And because you'd walk into the stable, and to me, it was like a stable full of horses that were just crying. It was, I couldn't. And I know, as unprofessional as that sounds, it wasn't. Anyway, when I called Norman and I said, listen, I just can't do
I have to say, that doesn't sound unprofessional at all. That sounds like a horse lover, and you just saw the right and the wrong, and that was the wrong, full stop.
Yeah.
Nobody likes to see that. And if you have to do those kinds of things to get results, you shouldn't be in the game, and you shouldn't be a top rider. For me, it's as simple as that.
Yeah. No, 100%. And I think that's where I was. And I was, I felt a bit broken. So Norman says, just get in your car and come. I said, look, I'll give her notice. But, so I put my dog into my car and we drove back to Norman, rode for him again. But the rides were, they were tough rides. They were the ones that would rear at the in-gate, wouldn't go in. They were dirty stoppers. They were, it was hard. But, you pay your dues. And it was okay because it's what I did and it's who I was. And
but not good for your confidence.
No, it wasn't. And one thing that I've always suffered from that time all the way until now is self-confidence and focus. And those two, having had those, I think that I would have followed in the footsteps of some of my colleagues, maybe. If I had maybe a partner.
You mean even as a young girl, when you were 15 and dominating on Victor, you still had self-confidence issues?
Yeah, definitely. I was okay on horses like Victor. I had a couple of really good rides. I had a horse called Spruce Meadows that I rode for a girl, and we won everything. But I rode him in running reins and with a stick upside down. Back in those days, you could even with the standing martingale and it was like mayhem in the ring, but I could win. Turn on a dime into a 140 oxer and just kick hard, and he would. No, I had some good, but Victor was. At that point, and he was mine. But you know what? Things happen for a reason, and I think at one point, so my father was going to go to India on a trip, and I was never home. I would go home for Christmas, and that was pretty much it. And he told me about, we were in touch, and he said, and I said, I'd really like to go. Can I come with? And of course, my father was he was so excited. And so I told Norm, I'm going to go just take a few weeks. I'm going to go to India with my father, and I'll come back. And he said, fine, come back. I'll find you something. We'll find you something. And then that was the beginning of the end. So we went for 2 weeks. My father left. I stayed for another 2 months. And in those 2 months, I had found someone through my father in the States that I wrote to. And he had a judge in New York City. Her name was Kumaswamy. She was a big, very politically connected person in New York. And I met with her. She did work for Mother Teresa and the Missionaries of Charity. And I was very keen to go and just to go and meet Mother Teresa. That was my idea. And so I met with her in New York, and she was pleased with me and who I was, and she wrote me a letter of introduction. So I came back to New York for that, and then I got back on the plane and went to Calcutta. And that was where I was lost. So I went there, and I dressed in my salwar kameez, and I went to Mother House, and there was a big chain, and you pull, boom, boom, it makes this big noise, and a little window opens, and I held my note up, and the door opens, and it's one of the nuns, and she's a white lady. She looked like an older version of me, and she said, "Can I help you?" And I said, "Well, I'd like to meet Mother Teresa." And she said, "Oh, really?" She said, "Okay, come in." So I went in, and we sat and we had tea, and she told me her name was Sister Andrea, and she was telling me about her experience, that I reminded her of herself. She also walked in and did, years and years ago, and we're talking, and she said, "But Mother's very busy." And I said, "No, I understand. It was just a chance." And anyway, we were finished with our tea, and she said, "Right, would you like to meet Mother?" Yes, please. So we went upstairs, and there was a few Indian men and Indian lady, and then me at the back. And we were sitting on a little bench, and then all of a sudden the curtain comes open, and there comes Mother Teresa walking out. And And she spoke with the one man and the next man, and then the lady. And then she looked, and teeny little thing.
Mm-hmm.
So of course, the first thing, as she looked at me, I dropped down to touch her feet, as I was prone to do with my limited experience at that point in India. And she said, no, because of course she was Christian. So, you know, it's a Hindu tradition.
Mm.
So she said, no, my dear. And she actually picked me up, and teeny little, but she had these hands, but I was dead weight. And we spoke for a while, and I told her of my father, you know, used to do some very good work, a service, you know, aid work. He would, you know, give some money to this, or, you know, what little things like that. And she wrote a beautiful note to Mr. Jim. My father's name is James Sinclair. And to Mr. Jim, thank you for doing God's work. So he still has it on his wall. And then she says, right, let's pray. So we went into her chapel, and just her and I. And she went on one knee, and I went on one knee. And she went on the other, and I went on the other. And I stayed behind her on the side, and she started praying, and I just sort of started mumbling, because I felt like very, you know. Anyway, she turned around and looked at me and started giggling, and we got up and we walked out, and we sat down, and then she said, okay, what do you want to do? And I said, Mother, I'd want to be a missionary of charity. And she just looked at me, and she had this huge belly laugh. And, you know, everything that you've done in your life just goes past your eyes. And I thought, oh my God, I was so embarrassed that she must, you know, I obviously must be a terrible sinner or something. She had such a laugh. And she said, no, my dear, God has much bigger plans for you. I mean, I'm 52 now, so we'll see. I don't know if there is still something in store, but I don't know. Anyway, so then she says, okay, what do you want to do? She said, no. She said, but you can work here. I said, what do you want to do? I said, wherever you want. So she first sent me to the Home for the Dying, and that's where I stayed we stayed at a little hostel across the street from Mother House. And then I would work in the Haure slum every day in the Home for the Dying. And then I moved to the Home for the Children, and I stayed there off and on for about a year. And I would go back and forth to the ashram down in South India, where you've seen the pictures of my mom and I. And yeah, and again, how my father, you know, we've all sort of, we really ideally were a middle-class family from America, from New York City, and nothing very special, but we've been very fortunate to have been given these opportunities. And my mother was a very devout Christian, and always had her rosary, and was always, you know, like the Indian Japamala, which is like, you know, the beads, and 108 beads. My mother had always her rosary with 108 beads with a cross. And she would say her Christian prayers, but with more fervor in India. You know, it was a beautiful, beautiful days back then. Sadly, my mother passed away.
Those pictures of you and your mom, was that your mom coming to visit you in that year when you were there?
No, that actually was that was at the ashram in South India, in this sort of southernmost interior of India, in Andhra Pradesh. It's so yeah. We actually had we still have a small apartment there. I was actually there in November, because I was told by one of my aunties that Indian aunties, that they were breaking the locks and trying to get in, because it's been 15 years now, I think. My mom, I was going to meet her in India, and she and my father were supposed to go. She was quite ill with arthritis and osteoporosis, and my father had to cancel last minute. The car actually drove up apparently to the driveway, and my father got a phone call, and for business he couldn't go. So my mother decided to go on her own, which was unusual, because she was quite frail. But I was meeting her in Bangalore, and then we were going to go together. And for some reason, and I had her booked at the hotel, her favorite hotel. It was like a palace, and she just, you know, and for some reason, she decided to go to the hotel, shower, and then leave. And unfortunately met with a head-on collision, the taxi driver and a truck, and passed away on the way to to the ashram. So I took my father back there about 2 months after, and then I go every year to just out of respect for my mom and for our life there, and it also for me it's it's just a beautiful space, just to upkeep her little apartment, and slowly I take a few things out and donate.
So you're saying your mom also lived in India for a while? So
she didn't actually live there. She lived also, well, at that time they were living in Connecticut,
Okay.
outside of New York, where they had lived since when I was 16. When I moved out, they actually moved from New York up to Connecticut. So that's actually where they had been all those years. But my mother would go and come to India. She's not a big fan of Africa, but India, she, I don't know. I think it was also this beautiful saris, and we had all these lovely aunties that we knew. We got to know their like family that looked after her too. They were like her aunties, they were grannies, and yeah, I don't know.
So Marlene, in total, you lived there working with Mother Teresa's organization for a year. Is that what you're saying?
Well, yeah, actually it extends, but in Calcutta, I was there on and off for about a year, but I was in India for that year in India, but I would just take a break and go down to the ashram just to take a bath and stuff, to just have a moment. But I am, but just so you know,
yeah. No, carry on.
I was just going to say, prior to that year that I didn't have really many rides, it was actually 2 years. So I was 1920 to 21, because 21 I was in India. So maybe 19 and 20. I went back to university. I did start university when I was 16, but I went for 1 semester and then I wanted to ride. That's so I stopped. I quit. And then I went back to university and I got a bachelor's degree. I started at NYU, and then I finished at a school in Florida, just near, it's called Lynn University, so I could ride for Norman there, in political science and international affairs. And I thought it was important because it to me, I think I needed to go somewhere, I needed to see something else. And then I found it. And then when I was in India, my father was on the board of directors of a company that he's based in New York or in Connecticut at that time, and he never lived in India or in Africa. He's always lived in New York. He'd visit maybe a week a year, But he was a commodities broker in Manhattan, and he had a seat on the commodities exchange as opposed to the stock exchange. It was commodities, and so for him, he was called in the 80s Mr. Gold. In fact, he even came here, which was illegal for him at the time, but because he was worldwide known as Mr. Gold, this was obviously, South Africa was one of the hot spots. But he was on a board of directors of a company that had properties, mining concessions in East Africa. And my favorite movie to this day is Out of Africa. In fact, I met Meryl Streep. Well, that's something else. But I wanted to see the sun setting over Mount Kilimanjaro. That was my dream. That's the one and only thing I ever wanted to do, besides maybe jumping, Aachen or something. But that was it. And long story short, I wrote a letter. I got a name from my father. I wrote him a letter in Tanzania, and I asked if they had any volunteer work available because I'd like to come to East Africa. And he said, we do in Dar es Salaam. And I thought, all right, I don't know where Dar es Salaam is, but I'll go. So it obviously Tanzania. And so I went from Mumbai to Dar es Salaam. And they had a foreman to do rehabilitation of a blind school. And he had some family issues, so he had to leave. So I stepped in. I didn't know anything about anything, but they just needed, I think, a responsible person. So I stepped in and oversaw it for 2 months, and went beautifully. It was Mchanganyiko, and it went well. And then they sent me for a weekend away as a gift before I was leaving the country. So they sent me up to Moshi Airport and then to a town called Arusha, and in this old colonial guest house. And it was cloudy, overcast, and so I went. It was high tea. I went out and I was having tea, and the clouds, not realizing really where I was on Earth. I mean, I was educated, but educated in the States. Forgive me, but it was a little bit, didn't realize Kilimanjaro was actually in Tanzania. There it was. The clouds dissipated and there was Kili, and I never left Africa. That was it. So I went back down to Dar es Salaam and I set up a foundation, and I started doing some social service work in Dar with some of the street kids. That's how it started. And then another long story short, with the mining concessions, my name was thrown around a bit because there wasn't many Wazungu, probably say like Mlungu, wasn't many Europeans around. And Archbishop Moleka from Rulenge, which is a village on the border of Burundi and Rwanda, had heard that there was this European lady who had been working with Mother Teresa, and he had written to her a few times. And she wrote back, but she didn't. He wanted her to send sisters, but Mother never opened up homes in rural areas. They were always urban, in ghetto slums, And so he had a meeting, asked for a meeting, and we met, and he asked if I would just send a letter with his letter to Mother and see if we can get. I said, okay, that's fine, I'll do that. So I did, but I sent it directly to Sister Andrea. And in 3 months' time, Mother sent 5 sisters to Dar, and I had to take them out to the border, to this village Rulenge, which was about a, say, 9-10 hour real proper bush drive from Mwanza, which was at the base of the largest city in that region. It's not really a city, a big town, base of Lake Victoria. And I was not allowed to raise money in her name. That's not the way she works. You can give if you can, but not till it hurts. But you're not allowed to say, come on, building, can you give me money? It's not that way. So I was able within the family to put enough money together, and then that's where I was based from 93, late 93 until 1995. I mean, obviously I would go back and forth for supplies or for a week now to do admin and stuff. And interesting, just quickly, because I know this is supposed to be for horses, so this is the whole reason, but I was there, we were going on a drive through the area. I don't recall for what, but we were in a place called Ngara, another village just on the border, Burundi and Rwanda, which are just on the border there of Tanzania. And we saw something that looked like a mist or something. And anyway, it was people. And it was actually when the Burundi coup took place, which was prior to the Rwandan massacres. And so then all of a sudden we had tens of thousands of refugees. And I was there. So, and I went to I ended up being the liaison for Tanzanian government, for the CCM to the UN department. So the UNICEF, UNHCR, and then of course Medicine Sans Frontier, and everyone ended up there. Okay, it wasn't as big of a setup, but it was starting to build. The camp was starting to build, get bigger and bigger. And then all of a sudden the Rwandan refugees. So in 94 we had, that was horrendous. And Tanzanian government gave us, as missionaries of charity side, permission to take in babies with no family, children and babies. So the orphanage that we were building, that didn't make much sense in 91, 92, all of a sudden was full of women who were very sick and very hurt, babies, children that were found in the grass. So that was booming. And then, we did terrible things. We had to go to Uganda to find the man who had this contraption that would actually fish bodies or items from bodies of water. And, that's when we had, they would have 10 people. Oh, Sarah, I don't know how much I can say. I don't want to hurt anyone. But, it was terrible. So we would get them out of the water. We had mass graves. We had dug. It was really something. Word. So it was, and all the meanwhile, Mother's Orphanage was building, and it was full. And
you were running this. I mean, you were they talk a lot today in this COVID time, front lines. You were front line. So you were seeing a
just
huge
by accident,
amount of,
actually. Yeah, but just by accident. But it's that kind of life actually suits me much more, because you don't have to think about yourself. If you start to think about, to me, the horses show jumping is different, because you do think about yourself. How am I riding, doing this correctly? And I'm pedantic. I'm a stickler for details, but when you're with your horse, you're just on it's another space. You're in another, when you share that energy space with your horse, you're elevated to someplace else. But I feel that same way when just being in those type of situations, because I was never afraid. Oh, well, that's not really true. I suppose I was afraid at times, but it was.
When you say you were afraid there would be a raid on the camp or some sort of retribution, or the violence you saw. Did you see any of the violence, or did you see the aftermath of the violence?
The aftermath. We saw the aftermath. I mean, I was in Rwanda about, I would say, probably late 95. No, earlier than that. But it was what we saw was horrendous. And I mean, what we saw when we were collecting the bodies out of the river and stuff, it was really like something out of a movie that you can't. But it's funny how the human mind works, because even in Calcutta, in the slums or wherever, the human mind can it's easy to help someone, let's say a man who has a very bad case of leprosy and many other diseases, to help to give them some dignity or some care as they're dying. And I know that sounds a little bit too out there and dramatic, but actually to me that's easier to do than to I don't know, just in everyday life, to go out to make sure everything is just about right, and you got to get this tax paid and this thing done and this done. That life to me was much easier. It's so easy to make a difference in someone's life. It's so easy. Just looking someone in the eye, so easy. Giving them a little bit of food when all they need is that just to fill that space.
Well, I mean, that's exactly what Mother, as you call her, was talking about when she when
that's
she
all
saw
she
that.
just to give people
your nature is you're a giver. You're a giver. That's who you are. You want to help people. It's amazing.
Well, for me, I was very fortunate to have been put in these different situations or been given a little window open for these opportunities. And I'm glad I took them. As much as I regret, could I have maybe seen an Olympic venue? I don't know. I may have back then, because my colleagues have, but it required something that I didn't have at the time and I don't have now, which is you really need that partner, not necessarily romantic, but I mean a business partner, someone out there fighting for you. I'm not good at that part of our industry. To get the rights. You seem,
Marlene, and if I can say this, you seem to be a person who exists without ego. And a lot of this sport that we are involved in does take a certain amount of ego, and I mean that to you in the nicest possible way. This sport can be, I guess, cutthroat, and you are not a person who I see. You're a healer. You're somebody who exists without that. And I think when you say self-confidence, I think self-confidence exists within that same box that ego exists. And maybe that's why you've always battled with that, because you're much more comfortable dealing with other people perhaps than you are, and I mean this in the nicest possible way,
No, I
than
take it.
yourself.
I take it as a huge compliment. I don't know if I actually live up to that, but I do appreciate that. I wish. I mean, I'm hoping I still have another shot at this sport. You know, I have. You know, I have one horse at the moment, but you know, for me, it's been about this part of my life, as far as the riding, has been about getting consistency, getting to understand the sport again.
Well, hang on, because we're not there yet. We'll
no,
talk to that.
That's.
That'll come later. But I
But
want
I
to
don't
know.
want to bore everybody. I'm sure.
No. This is a fascinating story. It's not the Out of Africa story and Karen Blix and Robert Redford that you were hoping for. But this is an amazing story on its own. So what happened? How did you get out of there? Why did you get out of there?
Yeah, so eventually when the Rwandan massacres happened, it was a very short period of time, actually. And the number of refugees, it was overwhelming. But we were able to, myself and my team, from the people who were helping me and from the village, Rulenge, the doctors, there was a cathedral in the bush. I mean, and no electricity. And so I also, from the foundation that I had in Dar, we got them solar panels, and we did all that type of work, and medicines and refrigerators to freezers, and to bring medicines and keep them, it was hard to bring fuel and all that because everything would be stolen, and it was complicated times. But at that point, the UN was fully established out there, and all of the aid agencies were all there, with all their fancy cars and planes and everything else. But, there was no more need. And the orphanage was not completely built, but I was finding some financial issues. So mother said, nope. I found another man out there who was also in the mining industry, who was just helping putting the final touches on the roof and one of the outer buildings and actually the gardens, because they grow their own food and everything. And it's still running to today, and I haven't been out there in years and years, but they say it's huge, and it's become also the retreat for all the missionaries of charity in Africa. So when the sisters go for retreat, because it's the only rural, and very sadly, mother was going to come, but she went, she opened that home in China, which was, something no one ever thought the Chinese government would ever allow. And she did. So she went, visited there. She was supposed to come to us. She got very sick. She went back home, and then she ended up passing away. So, we never got some other.
She died in what, 97, I think it was.
So yeah, something like that. Yeah. Because I was in Dar es Salaam, the day that when we got the news.
So you had a very close relationship with her. You had a lot of dealings with her?
She knew who I was, I suppose. That, I mean, for me,
you didn't have speed dial, did you? Was she
no.
on speed dial?
No, we had a satellite phone back in those days. You had to stop the car and you had to wind it up, and it was not like today. But yeah, so then I went back into. Plus, at that point I was about 26, I think, something like that. Anyway, I came back to Dar es Salaam for a little bit of a life, and. Then I realized.
So you realized you were a pioneer. You went out and you set up this place. You said there was nothing there when you arrived, and today it's a bustling. I'm going to call it a metropolis, wonderful. But it's a proper established.
It's a big, yeah.
So you were a pioneer.
I suppose in my own little New York way, I was, but. It really, things just, to me, they seem to, I feel like sometimes like I blow with the wind, and I go to the place, and I think it happens, because I didn't have experience. When I left there, I was fluent in Swahili because I didn't speak a word. I didn't know how to, I made a lot of mistakes. It's Africa. It's not easy. And there's no rule book on how you get things done, how you get, goods from A to B, or money from so I learned a lot. And when I went back to Dar, we were doing really good work. I was, at that point, I had become friends with one of the ministers. He was the minister of water and then became Minister of Foreign Affairs, and then became the president. And his sister actually helped me when he was nobody. He's from Bagamoyo, which is a village north of Dar. So I would travel with him and his family a lot on these. Oh no, I know how it was. He was Minister of Mines, and that was how I originally met him up in Ngara, because of the mining exploration, the temporary.
And you say he's now the president of?
No, he was the last president of Tanzania. He was Jakaya Kikwete, was it before this Magufuli. He was the last
and
president.
you have him on speed dial?
Well, I did a little bit, but I don't know if I should. I don't think there's many fans, but he was a good guy. I actually went with him to New York when he addressed the United Nations, and I was one of the guests of the Tanzanian delegation. Oh, that was fantastic. That was fantastic.
Where was that? At the White House?
No, that was in New York City at the United Nations.
Okay.
At the big building across on the river.
Yes.
And they were, because he was the head of the group of, not 7, those are the big 17 developing nations. But it was no, it was super. But one of his sisters helped me, and then she was HIV positive, and those days, I mean, it wasn't that long ago. It wasn't like 100 years ago, but there were no drugs available for HIV, and she was diagnosed, got very sick, and then passed away. I mean, it was only a few weeks' time, and I was one of the people overseeing her body at the funeral, because the women stay inside, and then all the mourners are screaming and they're crying, and which you have here as well. And the men would sit outside, very Muslim family as well. Sit outside under the tree, and you'd look and you'd be inside, and it was hot, and we were sweating, and out there the men are drinking Coca-Cola and eating the mishkaki and everything. And anyway, after that, the reason I tell that story is that made a big impact on me, because then they took her and buried her, and we had to stay still in the house. And she was a very dear friend, and I'd lost a lot of, I mean, in Africa, we really used to lose people in air incidents and on the road. We had Somali bandits on our highways. I had to take one from Mwanza, an army guy with his AK-47, and he would fall asleep on the, and I'm driving, and the whole drive for hours and hours, I would think, okay, when he blows his head off, how am I not going to get this in my mouth? And no, it was, but I realized that now I needed to do something else. So what I did was, a girlfriend and
I'm just thinking first world problems that we have, listening to you telling these stories, things that you...
No, listen, you have no idea my first world problems.
It's insane. Oh.
No, but then I realized I needed to do something else. So a girlfriend of mine and she was working for the Dutch embassy, and she wanted to further her education. So she started looking at master's degrees, and so I looked with her. And so I applied, and I got in to University of London, School for Oriental and African Studies. It's a very big school in central London, right across, I mean, like 2 blocks from London School of Economics, and really in that hub of, and she ended up bagging out, because I had actually introduced her to a man she ended up marrying. So she bagged out. She decided she was going to stay with him. And so I went on and I got my master's degree. Now in England, it takes a year. So I would fly back and forth. And so in a year's time, because I wanted to get a job with one of the aid agencies, I thought it would be a little bit easier, just having people, after I lost Tatu, my friend who helped run, it was hard to run something in Africa, with all the paperwork, and that was before everything is, nothing is on, we had no internet or anything, so to find the information. So I got a master's degree in medical anthropology, and I speak Swahili, and I can't get a job to save my life. Because for what, you get a trade. You do something that you can actually get a job. So I never really thought things out in my life. But I had this piece of paper from a very prestigious university, and I couldn't get a job.
What job did you want to get, and where?
I
Did you
wanted
want
to
go
work.
back to?
I thought I could run one of those. I could run one of those operations in a refugee camp. I could run an office in East Africa. I speak the language. I know the culture. I that's what I thought. But they would say I was overqualified, and I say, but I have no job, and I don't know, how can you say I'm overqualified? I think the problem is that because I always sort of worked for myself, that you really need to be in a in the structured with this language that you speak every day. You can't really think outside the box. Anyway, so I just continued to run the foundation, and then my father decided that he didn't like the way things were being.
Were you back in New York now, or in London, or?
No, now I'm still in Tanzania. I've never really left Tanzania until I came here, but I was in London back and forth for that year. I had my degree, and then my father was still in the States, as he's always been, but he decided that he wanted to show this board of directors that he knew better, and we were going to start a mining exploration company. I know nothing about this, and he doesn't really either. Anyway, we got together a few people. He came for a week or two. They gave him all these parties, brought him to the village, doing the, they have the ngoma, the drums, and he thinks he's a king, and he goes back home, and I'm left with this. But this is a very long story, which I won't bore you with. We ended up building this company. My job was just to make sure everybody else did their job. And I signed all the checks. And then we ended up had a reverse takeover of a larger company, also mining exploration company, that was based in Toronto. We ended up listed in Vancouver and Berlin on the stock exchanges, and then eventually listed on the New York Stock Exchange. And
this company that you and your dad started?
Yeah. Well, I would say my dad, my dad, but I was on the ground, and I was
this company that you started?
Yeah. No, I'm a glorified babysitter with a master's degree. Yeah. So I just made sure everybody else did their job, because I didn't, the only real strength that I had was that I could speak Swahili. So the way I appear, of course, there, it's an Islamic city, so I always was very appropriate with, always my hair up and, always covered and appropriate. But when they were having meetings, when we have meetings with the ministers or with the joint venture partners, or they would always have something to say, like, come, with my colleagues, come, my brothers come, we get this mzungu, and, that kind of thing. And I'd keep my mouth shut, and I could see my friends, my colleagues, just going different colors, like going green and purple, because they're thinking, oh my God, because she understands what they're saying. So they have to be careful. And then at the end of the meetings, I would always feel so good to be able to thank everyone and wish them everything, good day, and go over the meeting quickly, but do it all in Swahili. And they were just, so that was my strength. So they couldn't pull anything over, even though I'm not that clever. I just it's what I did. But that's how, so when people ask now, they say, oh, well, who pays for the horses and paid? That's how I had made my money. So from being a director of our company, which, we all had to pay back the shares, directors. So when we got, so it's not, my father didn't give me the share, we had, as all the workers, we had to pay back the shares at a very discounted price. But then the stock went up. So what I would do, being the daughter of a commodities broker, and then, obviously when it would dip, I would buy some, and when it would go up, I would sell and put it in, which had helped, considering that I've not been able to work in South Africa for 12 years. So that had been what I had been.
So is that company still going?
That company, yeah. So then when we moved here, lot happened in between, including 2 children. The mining industry collapsed. The price of gold collapsed. So I had got married to an Italian, a Roman, Giancarlo. And I'd known him since he was actually one of the first people I had met in Tanzania. I didn't like him very much, but anyway, we ended up marrying. And we were planning on we're going to leave Tanzania because now we have 2 children. There's no medical, there's 2 international schools, which we can't afford. So we're going to go back to Europe. But at that point, then all of a sudden the euro spiked, gold dipped. So we were buggered. But our son, I gave birth here in South Africa to both my children. And my son was very sick when I brought him home. I brought them both back when they were about 10 days, 2 weeks old. Tied to me like a good mama.
When you saying home,
Tanzania.
You brought back to Tanzania.
I was still in Tanzania.
So what brought you to South Africa? Why did you give birth here? Had you moved? Were you on holiday?
We hadn't. No, but I was going to actually have my daughter, my first child, in Italy, in Rome, but she was due in August. And I don't know if you've been to Italy in August, Ferragosto, but there's nobody anywhere except for the beaches. So I met with the doctor and he said, you can come, but I'm not going to be here. You're on holiday. So the States my insurance wouldn't pay for the States because their medical is too expensive, so they wouldn't cover. So a friend suggested South Africa. And of course I heard South Africa and I thought, it sounds so dangerous. Johannesburg, oh my God.
Yeah, no, I mean, you've been up there with the Rwandans and the Hutus and the Tutsis massacring each other, but South Africa was...
Yeah, it was a little bit... I didn't know who my enemy was in South Africa, So I flew down here and then I landed at OR Tambo and I just thought, are you kidding me? 3 hours away from Dar es Salaam and it's Europe. And then I go in the taxi and it's on the highways and they're phenomenal. And I'm like, are you kidding me? And then I go to a hotel in Sandton and I'm like, are you kidding me? I called Giancarlo. I'm like, did you know this existed? So I was over the moon. And so I was very happy the hospitals were incredible. And so that's how, then when I went back with my son, he was very sick. And at that point I had stepped back from the company because we had a lot of managers come in and there was checks and balances. And, at that point I had an infant and a toddler and every mosquito was my enemy. We had dengue fever in town. We had malaria in town. It was, we had mambas in the garden. No, it was like, I was tough. And then I had children and then I'm a worrywart. And I said, we got to go. We have to go. We need medical. I'm not going to, medevac my children. And then, no. So we came here. That was just how we said, we'll come here for a couple of years and then we'll go back to Europe. But then at that point, of course, money-wise, I bought a house for us and the cars, but I never expected us to ride. So it wasn't like, oh, let me put money, so this is going to cost a lot. It never occurred to me. And then, unfortunately, then Giancarlo and I had some troubles, so we separated. And so now I'm here with 2 kids and I wasn't feeling so good about myself and I was driving into 4 ways and there was a big sign and it said, do you want to change your life? Call this number. And that's all it said. And I was in such a state that I parked in my minivan under the sign and I called the number crying. And I said, I want to change my life. And he said, the man at the other end of the phone said, who is this? And I said, I'm under your sign. He said, he said, do you know who I am? I said, no. He said, my name is Chris and I own this gym. Come. It was a personal training gym. So I went and I got fit and they became really dear friends. And it was the owner of that gym. One day he said to me, have you paid your gym fees? I said, why? He said, because he knew that my passion had been riding. And he said, before you come back to this gym, I want you to go and get on a horse. I said, I'm 42 years old. What am I going to do? And he said, fine, whatever. But so I came the next day, and he opens the door and he said, have you been on a horse? I'm like, no. And he said, well, you can't come in. He ended up sending me down to Western Shop. I walked in there and I said, I'd like to take some riding lessons. Can you recommend a place? And I don't, they must have heard my accent and saw the blonde hair and thought, Bill Johnson. Perfect. So they sent me to Bill Johnson. But I told them that I only wanted to ride dressage. I would never jump because I was too afraid. So they sent me, so I bought a pair of boots, pair of breeches, and a hat.
So this is when? This is around 20...
This is, I actually wrote around 2009.
2009. And you've been in South Africa now, how many years? How many years had you been back in South Africa? 1 year.
Almost a year. Okay. Not quite. And it wasn't until
so you came to this country in about 2007, 2008, somewhere around there.
2000, actually it was 2000, end of 2008.
Okay.
Yeah. And then, so I went, they called Sandy and made a lesson for me. So the next day
They didn't know that you had this whole history of riding with Norman Delajoyo and one of the top US junior riders, and you didn't say anything.
No, God, no.
You said, how do I put these chaps on? How does this work?
No. But no, it gets better though, because Bill, still one of my, may he rest in, what a character, really, someone, and Sandy, both very special to me. That next day I went to Bill and he was ready with his cigar, and I said, listen, I haven't been on a horse in many, many years, and maybe I'll do some dressage. And he hated dressage. He hated flat work. He was a jumper, but I didn't know that. And so he said, don't worry, you're in good hands.
Did you tell him what you had done?
No. So I got on his school horse named Mr. Biggles. I don't know if you know Mr. Biggles. I don't know if he was that famous, but Mr. Biggles, he was a one-eyed, that short little tail school horse. So he led me down to the arena. Now this is 10 years ago. He led me down. So he wasn't a young man, is what I'm saying. And then he said, okay, come, let's trot. So he trotted around his whole arena, holding Mr. Biggles. And then he said, you want to canter? And I said, no, I can't. I said, come, just a few strides. And he ran alongside me, cantering. And I was crying. I was so scared. And he's like, no, come. You come back tomorrow. Okay, so I came back tomorrow.
But they say it's like riding a bicycle. Is that nonsense?
It's nonsense. I think it's absolute nonsense. But I don't know, maybe. But for me, it wasn't. It was terrifying.
But the passion came back. Tell us about that moment when you were crying. Okay. Was that because you were overwhelmed that this passion that you'd had 20 years ago, 25 years ago, suddenly all came flooding back?
No, I was actually afraid for my life. I was like, I was really
running the romance.
No. I'll give you the romance now. Okay, so I came back. He did the same thing with me. This time he says, come, we're cantering over this cross. So he himself, on the long side of me, running, jumped over the cross, and I jumped over the cross, and I'm crying. He said, right, come back. It was like a Friday, so come back on Tuesday or whatever. So I came back, and he said, you're doing this on your own. And I was afraid. Okay, but I did it.
Did he say that because he realized at 73 years old, he probably shouldn't be doing lead rein jumping over crosses? Or because he knew that you had sort of some aptitude and he was onto you because the girl had a leg position and looked like she knew what she was doing?
Well, the thing is, I put my hair up in my helmet like the Americans. So already there was, I think, a question right there. But okay, quickly, I'll get to the point. So then the fourth time I come, I'm riding, I'm cantering, I canter the cross, I have my glasses on, I'm crying, I mean my sunglasses, I'm crying, I'm like just tearing, I'm nervous. And he said, I want you to jump this course. I said, no, it was about a meter. It was big. I mean, my eyes at that time. And there were just like 3 lines, like a hunter course.
He was on to you.
I want you to jump it. You jump this course. It was like 6 strides, 7 strides, 4 strides or something, whatever it was. I said, no. He said, you jump. And something, he just made me, he said, you never questioned Bill Johnson. Or whatever it was, you go jump. picked up a canter. I did my warm-up circle, and I cantered the course. After I jumped the last jump, he screams, he has his hands up in the air, "You're a show jumper!" Screaming.
And that's when you let the cat out the bag and said, "Yes, Bill, I've trained with George Morris, Norman De La Joya." What point did you tell him?
Well, I told him I used to jump a bit. And then I wanted to buy a horse. I said, "You know what? I've made money. I'm here. Let me buy a horse." Long story short, Alzu Skagway came into my life. And I was just so chuffed. He's a lovely horse, and I'm just going to jump him a meter, and that's perfect for me. And then, so the day came that I wanted to enter a show, but now I have no rating. I have no, because back in the day, you didn't have to get points there was nothing like that. So I wrote to the United States Equestrian Federation, and they wrote back a beautiful letter. "Oh, we're so happy that you're back. Come, you go, girl. You know, make a comeback. We'll vouch for Marlene that she can jump at the highest level, blah, blah, whatever." So I want to say it was Di Baxter, but I don't remember who was in the office back then. And they said, "Okay, fine, but you need to get your points from 110. So it's fine. I hadn't been in the ring, and I wasn't going to jump bigger than 110 anyway. So I jumped a couple of meter classes, jumped a few 110 classes, won everything, a few 120. And then I had a very bad accident. I was at home. I don't remember the accident at all, but Bill and Sandy say that I was just jumping a small oxer, had a lovely stride. He jumped and he somersaulted. Of course, I had a helmet on. I always ride with a helmet. I was in Sunning Hill for 3 days in ICU and for 2 weeks in the hospital, and I was palsied. So my whole side of my face and my arm, I was paralyzed.
Yeah.
I had ringing in my ear for about a year. I had very bad double vision. So I didn't ride. I don't remember. I don't remember the accident. I don't remember months after. I do remember it was about 6 months after the accident, because it was in the summer, in the winter. And I went to the neurosurgeon, and at that point I was still in a taxi cab, we had a driver that helped because I couldn't drive. And Bill was just keeping Skaggy ticking over. I didn't know what to do. So I went to the neurosurgeon, and he said, "Right." He said, "You need to understand something. You will never, ever jump again." And everything else he said after that was a blur. And I said, "Thank you very much." I got up, got in my taxi cab, called Bill, said, "Lunge Skagway, I'm coming to ride." He said, "What? I said, "I don't care. If you don't lunge him, I'm still going to get on him. So it would help me out if you can just lunge him." And I went home, got in my minivan, put on the hazards, because I had such bad double vision. So I had to look this way in order for the two to come to one. And I drove to the stable, and I got on Skaggy, and I started riding again. And
why did you do that? What took over your winning?
Because I thought that there was no way that the universe would bring me such a long way around back to where I started to jump a meter. There was no way. There's more. There's more. And because it was, I used to sit at KPC at the Bob Charter. I was jumping a meter 10, and I would sit in that one grandstand between the schooling area and I would watch all the big classes. And I would watch the big riders, and because I knew that they would come up also and talk to each other about the track near me, and I could watch them in the schooling area warm up, and then I could watch them jump. And I knew, so I was getting to know the riders that way from a distance. And I knew, I just kept saying, I can do this. I can do this. And so that was the motivation. And then eventually, it still, look, I have to be honest with you that I still have some issues with my eyesight. And this is just for reading and seeing close. But when sometimes in the ring, when you see me go a little bit, right, it's like I take a bit of a deep breath. Okay, my horses have been lucky because they're very well schooled, Amaretto and Camaro. So when you sort of take a deep breath, they actually shorten, you know, you don't even have to touch their mouth, and you know, the leg is always there. But sometimes because I look And I mean, I know Shane Gonda, I don't know if she really knows the extent of it, but, you know, she even Barry before would say, just trust your eye, you have a good eye, trust your, but there's an ever so slight, not so sure where I'm looking. So, and then sometimes when I turn my head and look to a fence on the left, I have still a little bit of an issue when my right eye closes. So, you know, remember that big World Cup at Midrand that we had in the Bob Charter? I was second. Ray won it.
Clooney
I
won,
jumped that jump off with my right eye shut completely. It was, and I mean, I still remember Gonda saying, why didn't you just leave out the stride to the last jump? It's like, I just didn't want to, I don't like to make excuses. If it is difficult, but if I can't.
I would say that that's a pretty valid excuse, though. I don't think that's making excuses.
No,
you know?
but the thing is if that, if I can't.
I couldn't see the last stride because I actually couldn't see the jump.
I couldn't judge because he was jumping so high. I don't know if you remember that guy. He was jumping so high. I was actually getting chucked out the saddle, and that's not normal. I mean, his jump was always a little difficult to sit, but I was really, and it just must have jarred my neck so much in the first round that by that second round, I mean, we had a double clear. It was quite awesome, actually. But you know what? You just kick in thinking, is it there? Is it there? And then you'd see me do like this and then go, poop, you know, those last few strides. And it's not correct. But, you know, I don't know. To me,
so getting back to your story, because we're running a little bit short on time.
Yeah,
your rise back to the top. How long did that take? There was Skagway, then there was the acquisition of Amaretto and Camaro.
Yeah. So, okay. So quickly, I tried to I couldn't really. So then, Skaggy. Then I got to Harry just after the accident when I started to ride again. And then I went to, that's when I went to Florida. I called Norman and I said, listen, can you come to Africa and maybe just work with me a little bit? And he said, look, to me, it would be like fixing a broken leg with a plaster. He said, if there's something wrong, he said, come and work with me again, then you can work back. So I went to Florida and worked for him for 3 months and rode for him there and came back. And I realized that Bill Johnson gave me that courage and he gave me that passion again. He helped just light that fire. But I already started going to 135 and 140, and it wasn't the place. I needed a slightly different type of a yard, you know, and
I just want to touch on something. When you went back to Norman, had he seen you in those 25 years?
No, he didn't even recognize me he knew I was coming. He set up everything for me and place to stay and everything else in a car and everything. But I actually went up to him and I said, excuse me, Mr. Della Gioia. I said, I actually can't remember what I said to him, and he looks at me, and I was like, Norm, it's me. And he was funny. He was funny because he's like, you're foxy. I said, what, foxy? Are you still in the 70s? What is wrong with you?
And you're a dirty old man.
No, it was sweet. I mean, just quickly, we were one evening, one of the night classes. It was actually, I think it was the Olympic trials when I was there, and we just walked the course, and we came out. We were going to watch the first few. Norman had a couple of people jumping, and Ian Miller came. So we're leaning on the fence. So Ian came on this side of me, and Nick Skelton came on that side of Norman, and they were asking Norman for their horses. How would he ride? What would he do? Gave him some ideas, and we had a little bit of a laugh. They made a joke. I giggled, and meanwhile I'm like freaking out. I know I grew up with these people, but still I don't care. They're, you know. And they both walked away, and I grabbed Norman's shoulder and I said, oh my God, I hope my children are going to be okay. And Norman's like, why, what happened? I said, because I think I've just died and gone to heaven. And he goes, oh my God, you were such a dork. I said, yeah, I know. I can't help it.
Did any of your contemporaries from your junior years, were they there? Did they see you? Did they recognize you? Did they ask where the hell you've been in the last 20 years?
Yeah, I saw quite a few people. It was wonderful. You know, I sat in the International Riders gazebo all day, and well, when I wasn't riding at the stable, and I'd help, you know, with jumps, and yeah, it was amazing actually. And I mean, it was one point I was with Charlie Jacobs. His older brother, Louis Jacobs, was a big rider back in the day. And Charlie was a bit younger than I. Charlie rides in Nations Cups and does a lot of team riding for the US. And he, we were talking, he said, I've seen that gray horse of yours, looks very nice. I said, yeah, we're still in the 145s. I said, but we get time faults all the time. And the whole place went quiet. He's like, you get time faults? See, I had a very different reputation back then. I was like, yeah, I get a lot of time. And oh boy, if they knew now how many I've accumulated with Camaro, they would probably.
Who was the horse he was talking about? Amaretto.
Amaretto, yeah, because he saw him.
How did he see him?
On social media? Because he had seen him on Facebook and pictures that I had posted and stuff. And
okay.
And he said, I said, yeah, Amaretto was a phenomenal horse. Hey, and so I had him for about. So I went over to Then I left to Bill on very good terms. He and Sandy really understood and they've been my support. Sandy still is a huge support and a very dear friend. I went to Barry. I introduced myself to Mr. Taylor. I said, Mr. Taylor, and then I panicked and I forgot what my name was. Anyway, he took me on, and Barry really taught me how to be a show jumper. Just, to watch him day in and day out, he's magic with horses. I mean, he really is. I have very few riders of that natural ability and feel, and he's a master. I learned a lot. I learned everything from him. And then when I went to ride with Gonda, she really helped to fine tune. And the main thing that I can say that Gonda helped me with was focus. I can get very distracted. Sometimes you can see me go canter there and I'm thinking, where am I supposed to go? And I just went over the course here. That's the focus part that I would lose. But with Gonda, I could really be in that moment. And, I was with her for the year before, so 2017 and then 2018. And 2018 was our big World Cup year. And just to be around, such a great equestrian, powerful woman, strong, confident. It was everything for me.
And your self-belief, because that was
for sure. And Chad Cunningham also. Chad, of course, because Gonda's here, but Gonda oversees everything, even from down there. So she would orchestrate everything, from there. But Chad never let me ease up once. I was very happy to have lessons with his young riders, or or even more novice riders. Perfect for me. Everything always makes you better, and he would never let me forget that I'm in that saddle, and look where I'm going, and think, and this is the moment. And it was a lot of back to basics, a lot of no stirrups, a lot of very basic, just again to fine tune me again, to get me a little bit back to. I know on Camaro I never had a very pretty position. He was, he's a big long horse, and it was, he had that very big lofty, little bit hollow.
There you go again. I don't know why you say that, and because it's not true to begin with. And the second point is, even if it were true, it doesn't matter, because you're effective, you are stylish, and you got the job done, and you finished up as the joint winner of the World Cup Series. So
yeah, it was a good year.
Marlene, the positives, Marlene, you need to be like what those Australian mindset, where they lose a game by 50 points and they come out and they say, yeah, but we're going to focus on the positives. I think you need to be a little bit more Australian and say, right, we need to focus on the positives.
All right, mate.
It's
true.
So where are you now? Because unfortunately, you say you've retired Camaro.
Shame. Last year, after his big World Cup year, that was the first year I'd owned him already for, I think I've had him now for 5 years, but he never made it through a year. He x-rays, everything it was fine, but he was never sound. He's a very big, heavy horse with a very long back, and he also has a lot of gut issues, colics a lot. And he that year, he knew how important it was for me. He's all heart. We all know as you say, he's built to jump buildings and is not built for speed. He really, but to be able to finesse those World Cup tracks and do what he did, I'm telling you, he just did that with heart. But it was too much for him. And then when I tried to jump him last year, he was sound, but he wasn't right. And then we finally pulled him out. I tried the Easter show, but he kept trotting out sound, and we'd X-ray, and anyway, CT scanned him, found something little, treated it, kept him out for 6 months, tried to bring him back, and then, as you know, he was, even that the day before, I even said, someone had asked me how I did. I said, I had a pole, but I'm not riding my horse. It's not my horse. Something isn't right. And then I even told Gonda that morning, even if I qualify for the big day, I think this is it. Let's give him off. And unfortunately, I jumped him. We had a good ride to that Oxford, and then he landed and he pulled that tendon. And he's only just 15, but he's going to have a good retired life. My daughter she's a young novice rider. She's 14, but she'll start to do a little rehab on him. But that's it. He won't, I'm not going to put a leg over. When I jumped off that day, I knew that was it. But he'll have a good retirement. And I do have that young stallion Douglas I've had for 2 years. He's
fantastic, and you guys really suit each other because he brings a little bit of blood and wants to go to his fences.
Yeah. And I mean, I've never let him go either. I've never really had a go. And we only did 3 shows last year, and we had 3 podium finishes in the 140s. He's amazing. He was starting to act a little stallionish, a little funny at that last show, and then we just have had we've had a little bit of bad luck, but it doesn't seem to be anything serious. And I think we might have it right. So perhaps because he's ready for the 150s, and I think he's one of the best horses I've ever sat on. He doesn't have that obvious power as Camaro. He doesn't have the finesse like a ballet dancer, like Amaretto, and
But he's got fire in his belly, and if you let him run, so you need to now tap into 15-year-old Marlene,
absolutely,
who was the attacking junior champion on Victor.
Yeah.
Let's tap in there a little bit.
Yeah, from your mouth to God's ears.
It does look like a really, really promising partnership. So, Marlene, are you here to stay? I know that there was a little bit of after the World Cup when you would have liked to have gone and done something overseas, or you were saying on your social media that perhaps there was a little bit of, I'm not going to say disgruntled at all, but you were thinking about moving on and going back to the States. So are you here to stay?
No, well, I love Africa. I've been here for a long time. But there's an issue. I can't work in South Africa. And I've tried everything. And so legally, and I don't play with these rules. It's not for me, not in this day and age. And I'm a tax-paying U.S. citizen. I still pay federal taxes every year. I don't pay state tax because I haven't lived there in almost 30 years, but I still pay federal taxes. I wouldn't mind to go back. I'm not a big fan of the politics back there, but I have a lot of friends, and there's quite a lot of people who would like me to come back, but the opportunity hasn't presented itself. I was offered a lovely position in Italy, but it would have required me to be away from the kids for many months to get set up. And it's a problem now because there's a lot of very good young riders out there, especially in Europe, and hardworking and with the same discipline that we were brought up with. And the problem, it's not a problem. I don't want to say that. I have 2 amazing children that I wouldn't trade them or our life for anything. But you live to be a rider in Europe, unless if you have the money to do it, on a private basis, amateur basis. It's you're on the road, you're working day and night, and unless of course either that or you have a partner perhaps that also that you live with, that works so that the kids come with, you're always together as a family, that's another thing. But in my situation, I think at the moment, it's been hard. There's not a lot of disposable cash at the moment. Obviously, for a lot of people, I know this time is going to be very difficult. We'll see, what kind of world we're going to step into now. For myself, it hasn't directly affected me in so much, but I was already in a bit of a bind prior. I had thought, let me work up the ranks, because I went and did my first 150 quite quickly after I started riding. I mean, it was only 3 years, and then I was jumping, and I jumped the Derby with Amaretto, and had many podium finishes. I think I've had about 12 podium finishes between the two, and not one win in the World Cup. But I was really hoping that now this year, because I really was focused on consistency and getting the riding and the technical aspect and getting it under my belt, that last year, 2019, I was really planning on taking risks and moving into something that wasn't necessarily my comfort zone at this point in my life. But of course, I haven't had a horse because, I had some, like I said, Kamaru and then Douglas, also just some bad luck. So I've had no horses to ride. I don't know what the future is, to be honest with you. I've got 2 children to raise, and they're good kids, and they need mom.
Where would you like to be if you could say, right, I want to be somewhere? Is this now home for you, or could you say that?
I think if I had, let's say, endless finances at this moment, I would stay here, to be honest. And then, I mean, ideally, I see myself retired back in East Africa on the side of Mount Meru. But for the children's sake, I really don't know. I don't know what the right thing for them. I'm an older mother. My kids are young. I could still ride. I'm fit. I'm strong. I'm hoping to. I still want to stand at the top of that podium here in South Africa. In one of the big classes.
Well, then we've got to work on a way. We've got to. What do we need to do to get you to be able to work here or stay here? Is your visa running out? Is it just a work thing? Can we marry you or something?
It's work thing. You know what? I think it's an opportunity that I'm missing somewhere, that I'm sure is there, but I haven't yet seen it. Because obviously, as we all know, we need horses, and to work. I'm still waiting permanent residency. I was able to apply, and they accepted my application, but then they stopped giving permanent residency. Then they started, then they stopped again, and now the backlog is, probably in the tens of thousands. I honestly, I wish I had a little bit more, but I don't know. I would love, if I could get a few more horses under my belt and start to build something. A yard or like I said, if I had endless, and perhaps if I could have seen down the road, I may have used the money to buy a property and buy some young horses and then built up. But I think in my thinking, I thought, let me get up to the top, and then from there I can build, because then I will have, because nobody knows me here. And in America and in Europe, they haven't seen me in at that point 20 years, more than 20 years. So let me just build up a name, and then I can build from that. So unfortunately,
Marlene, it again to me comes down to this whole self-confidence issue. You are more than accomplished. You have this amazing background in horsemanship that you learned from some of the greats, the De La Joyos and the Pessoas, and I would imagine that you have, and you are a thinker, you are a clever person, you are somebody who retains the information that you will learn. So from where I'm sitting, and you have now won a World Cup series, you are a name among the top echelon riders. I think you need to back yourself a little bit more and say, I'm more than capable of doing it. I'm a very accomplished horsewoman, and there is no reason why you cannot do it. So I'm hoping that people are going to watch this and see your story and say, this is a remarkable story. And somebody's going to get behind you and set you up and help you on your way, and make sure that that knowledge that you have is retained in this country, and that you can go into coaching and go into developing younger riders and make a real go of this as a horsewoman, because you have the tools. You have the tools in your tool bag to do it.
Thank you, Aidan. For me, it would be a dream, and we'll see. I'm not gonna give up. It's never been a part of who I am. But there's sometimes, like in early life, I knew it was time to walk away. But it
I mean,
doesn't feel,
again,
it doesn't feel right now.
you've just told me that you feel like home, and this is what you want to do. So this is something that that needs to happen, and I think this is part of your journey. It's been such a remarkable journey, listening to what you. First of all, I do think you need to write a book.
Well, we'll see. Maybe we'll get that. Maybe that'll be my retirement. But I just don't know the ending yet. I still feel like, especially in our sport, I haven't done what I've come back to do yet. I don't know what that is. I don't know if it's a big win. I don't know if it's going again back to Europe or to the States or building something. I don't know what it is, but I'm not done yet. And then once, like the crescendo, I don't know where that, maybe when that starts, then I can start to write something. But I just I'm not really a very imaginative person, so I kind of have to wait for the wind to change, I think. And then, but I do have 2 children, and I need to make sure that that they have also a good future and a good chance. So we'll see. I don't know, but I'm just I just want to say before we finish, I'm just so grateful to South Africa. I mean, it's given me the second chance at a dream. And if I were in Europe during these years, I would never have been able to compete at this level with the amount of money required. And I mean, I would have maybe been able to get in with Joss or with Neko or maybe Rodrigo, someone. Those are possibilities. But this, to be able to walk away and say, I won this World Cup series consistently. I was on the podium, 5 out of 6 classes. That's cool. I know that's a lie.
It's more than cool. It's something that a lot of riders work towards their whole life. I mean, you got to put it back into perspective. You were, in terms of riding in the wilderness for over 20 years, came back, had to be led around an arena, and in a very short space of time, like you say, you were back at full steam, jumping derbies. You've won a World Cup. And I think this is only the beginning for you. I must be honest.
Thank you.
I really do. I feel something around the corner is waiting for you. So I just want to say thank you so much for sharing your life experience and your journey with us up until where you are today. But like I say, I think it's, what was the saying that Winston Churchill said? It's not the end. It's not even the beginning of the end. It could just be the end of the beginning.
The beginning. Well,
so in terms of your riding.
Thank you. Well, listen,
and I must say, I think you are an inspiration to people getting back in the saddle at the age of 42 and saying, it's not too late. Yeah. It's not too late. It really is not. This sport is one of those sports that affords you a great deal of longevity. And I mean, you are well, you are fit, you are strong, and you are healthy, and you prove that it's never too late. And thank you for that, because as somebody who also has boxes to check and has been involved for a long time and has never got the top rides, and I know what it's like. So for me, looking at somebody like you, I just go, it's not all over. It can be done. So thank you.
No, thank you. It's been a great honor, I must say. Just even a few years ago, to have looked forward and to think that I would be sitting chatting with you today on this platform. It's a huge honor for me. I mean, this is not my country. I've been taken in. It's my. I mean, to me, I've started my sport here in a way. Even though but my career back in the States was short. It was intense, but it was short. Yeah. So South Africa has given me so much.
I said it before, you are a giver, and I think you have this huge amount of knowledge in your brain and of your experiences, and that's going to be given back to students. That's where I see this going. So hopefully somebody's going to watch this and go, you know what, we need to keep you here because you've got knowledge that we can really, do with.
Thank you. That's a huge compliment. Thank you so much. I just hope I didn't bore you guys. I mean, it's been a long time that I haven't spoken to another adult, so thank you.
I think people are going to see a whole nother side of you and a story that I'm sure many did not know, and going to be in awe, because I certainly am. Marlene, thank you so much for chatting. I really,
it's been an honor. Thank you. Keep it up. You're doing such great stuff. Okay, cool.
Thank you. Take care.
Ciao.
Bye, bye, bye.
Bye. Bye.